So now you all know that this is being recorded. So I am going to thank you for being a part of this training, because being a moderator is not as simple as it sounds. And yet it's as simple as it sounds. So the important part for us is to just get some of the general basics under our belt so that we feel like we can serve a little bit more confidently as moderators. So the first piece that I'm going to tell you is I do have a handout. I will email that to you at the end of our time together. So you do not have to take copious notes, but if you want to, you can. The first section is called the role of the ruling elder. Now, as ruling elders yourselves, you probably already know a lot of this, but I want you to now focus on this as the moderator, so that you're thinking about the role of the people that are sitting in the room with you as you're moderating a meeting. So together with teaching elders, if there's a teaching elder in the moderation seat, ruling elders are called together to exercise leadership, government, spiritual discernment, and discipline. And they have responsibilities for the life of a congregation as well as the whole church, including ecumenical relationships. Now, how many of you have thought that you actually had some responsibility for ecumenical relationships, right? Essentially, if it happens in a church, the elders are ultimately responsible. Hear that again. It's not the pastor. If it happens in a church, the elders are ultimately responsible. When elected by the congregation, elders shall serve faithfully as members of a session. When elected as commissioners to higher councils, ruling elders participate and vote with the same authority as teaching elders, and they are eligible to hold any office. If they feel called, ruling elders also may seek training to be pulpit supply and commissioned ruling elders. Some specific areas of elder responsibility include, but are not limited to, receiving members in the church, leading the congregation in participation in the mission of the church, providing for the worship of the people of God, including preaching, corporate prayer, and sharing of the sacraments, determining the occasions, days, times, and places for worship, providing arrangement of worship space and the use of special appointments like flowers and candles and banners, and ministries of music and drama and dance and visual arts, and providing for developing and supervising the spiritual growth of members. How many of you thought that was all the pastor's job? Yeah, it's not. It's the elder's job. They're also responsible for developing and supervising the education and equipping ministries of the church. They're to lead the congregation in ministries of personal and social healing, oversee the church's government and administration, assist any teaching elder or deacons, if they have them, with shepherding and pastoral care, provide for outreach and evangelistic opportunities for the greater community, oversee and encourage stewardship opportunities. Yeah, talking about the budget. They're to oversee and maintain the church's finances, including establishing the annual budget and other special offerings. They can oversee the staff, provide for the management of the church's property, maintain regular and continuing relationships with higher councils. That's the Presbytery. They also can establish and maintain necessary ecumenical relationships. They can serve in judicial matters in accordance with the rules of discipline or church discipline, if that section is adopted. And they can keep an accurate roll of members. Imagine that. And before we think that they're done, their responsibility of being an officer of the church includes praying, studying, working, oh, you'll like this, being punctual, being dependable, being prepared, being collegial, attending worship, supporting and encouraging, leading and following, sharing, being accountable, being partners in joy and sorrow, asking for help when they need it, and asking their pastor if the pastor needs help, and taking initiative and planning and implementing and getting things done, and multiplying ministry through spreading the opportunities. And this one's a tough one, being open to change and ideas other than their own. Ooh, I know. They can serve on committees, and committees of the Book of Order show that nominating is the only one required of a church to have. That means the church does not have to have a buildings or a grounds committee. It doesn't have to have a stewardship or finance committee. It doesn't have to have a personnel committee, but it does have to have a nominating committee. Any other committee that is in a church is created by the session to aid the session in its charge. That means whether you've had an evangelism committee for 30 years or not, if that committee is not being successful in helping the church, it can go and a new committee can take its place, or the work can be done by the session as a whole. How do you like that? Now, the congregation is important to have some focus as well, because the Presbyterian Church has delegated government, meaning we elect people from within the congregation to serve the congregation. They are not representatives who have to go back and say to the constituents, how do you want me to vote on this? They are delegated the job of serving, but their responsibilities then from the congregation are to serve well. And of course, we already listed a lot of their tasks. The congregation as a whole, though, does not get to pass off all of their work to their elected Christians. They still have responsibility for electing ruling elders, deacons, trustees, members at large for the nominating committee. They still have to vote to call a pastor if the pastor is installed. They also have to vote if there's a change in the existing pastoral relationship. If that means giving the pastor who's installed a pay raise, that's a change to the terms of call that has to be voted on by the congregation. Also, if a pastor's call is to be dissolved, that has to go to the congregation if the pastor was installed. The purchase, mortgaging, or selling of real property also needs a congregational vote. Also needs the approval of Presbytery, but it does need to have a say-so from the full congregation. And you're going to like this one. For small churches who want to have a waiver for the terms of service to allow someone to serve more than 6 years as a deacon or an elder, that actually has to come as a request of the congregation, not of the session. So if the person that they want to serve beyond 6 years is elected by the congregation for an additional 3 years, then the congregation can request of the presbytery an exemption for the Book of Orders rule on term limitations. When a congregation meets, it can meet doing both ecclesial and corporate business at the same time. So that means whenever we are doing a congregational meeting, it is also the corporate meeting, because that is a meeting of the members of the corporation. If the congregation's rules allow people to be under the age of 18 to join the church, which most of them do, and your state rule says that a person must be 18 or older to vote on property rules, then if the congregation wants to buy, sell, mortgage property, those members who are under the age of 18 may have to abstain from that particular vote. but that's the difference between the civil laws and the church laws. Every council, including a session, should have its own manual of operations. In that, it should have its articles of incorporation. It should have its church bylaws. It should have any church policies, including things like job descriptions, wedding policies, rentals of property use. It should also have a sexual misconduct policy and a child and vulnerable adults policy. Those should be available to all people who are serving as elders, as well as anyone else that they feel that it's important for them to have, like staff should have the ability to see what those policies are. You might want to ask before you go in to serve as a liaison or to serve as the moderator, what are your bylaws? Do you have any standing rules? So that you can make sure that the session is not going to violate any policies in their actions that happen when you're on the clock. Now, there are two different kinds of meetings for a session. They are called or stated. That's the two kinds. Called meetings are sometimes called special meetings, and stated meetings are their regular meetings. Kinds of meetings for congregations are called meetings and annual meetings. Again, a called meeting is sometimes it's called a special meeting, but there's also the annual meeting. Stated meetings of session and annual meetings of a congregation can consider almost any topic, including new business. But a called or a special meeting is limited to the topic for which the meeting was called. So in the call for a special meeting, it must say what business will be conducted, and that's the only business that may be conducted. So if someone says, but I have other new business, you can say it is out of order for this meeting. It will have to wait until the next stated meeting, unless they want to call another special meeting. Sessions are required to meet at least 4 times a year. They should have a docket, which is the order of items that will come up during the meeting. Then we should talk a little bit about motions. And many of you know there are then minutes. The minutes are those things that tick by while you're stuck in the meeting. Sorry. Minutes are the written record that goes into the permanent book to keep track of what that church has done historically. So let me take a brief moment and talk about membership roles before I get into the meat of polity. There are 3 categories of church membership. The first is baptized. Anyone who has been baptized but has not yet made a profession of faith is on the baptized roll. Typically, if a person joins the church as an adult and is baptized at that time, they automatically make the profession of faith when they are baptized. So an adult that is baptized typically also goes into the active list because they have made a profession of faith. Who you will find on your baptized roll typically are infants and young children who have not yet gone through a confirmation class or gone through some kind of profession of faith to join as an adult. The active list is someone who has been baptized. Don't forget to ask, because sometimes people don't know if they've been baptized, and it's maybe something you want to check before you admit them as a member if they have not yet been baptized. The person will make a profession of faith where they will voluntarily submit to the government of the church and willingly participate in the life of a church. There's a whole list. If you go into the book of order, there's a whole list of things that a member should do. And it's always fun to show that to people when you say, are you sure you'd like to be a member? Not that we're discouraging it, but I like to encourage people. I'd rather have an active member than another inactive active member. An affiliate is a member of another PCUSA congregation and who they're temporarily residing in your community. They want to be affiliated with the church, but they still want to maintain their membership in their home church. So they can become an affiliate member. They still have the right to become a part of the congregation, but they do not have the ability to vote or hold office in the church where they are an affiliate. Only those people who are on the active roll have the opportunity to vote and hold office in a PCUSA church. Also know that if you have someone who comes and wants to become a member of the PCUSA church, but also wants to be a member of a Lutheran church or a Methodist church or a Nazarene church or anybody else, it's one or the other. Pick one. I mean, we're not going to go to that other church and say, take them off your books, they're ours. But we do encourage that if they're going to be an active member with us, then they're all in. They're willing to become a part of the active membership of the PCUSA church. The Book of Order no longer requires an inactive membership role. Congregations can keep one if they so choose, sometimes to make it feel more palatable. They call it other participants instead of inactive, which sounds kind of abrupt. But a member must be inactive, meaning no participation, for 2 years before they can be deleted from the active membership role. They should receive contact before they are moved to the inactive role. All right, now, this is when you put your seatbelts on, because we're going to do some basic parliamentary procedures. I will tell you that if you are at a session meeting, chances are there are less than a dozen members present. We have some churches that still have more than that on their regular session, but most of our churches don't. So if you have a board meeting where there are about a dozen members present, you can follow the procedure that's in Robert's Rules of Order called Procedure for Small Boards. It is less formal, and so it allows things to be a little more friendly, especially to our congregations that are not full of people who took the parliamentary procedure in 4-H or wherever they might have learned it. The rules governing meetings are a little bit different than what they might see if they come to a presbytery meeting. But you'll also recognize that this sounds familiar with maybe what you're used to in your session. So someone on the session can raise their hand instead of standing to seek to obtain the opportunity to speak. And they can remain seated while they make their motions or they speak. When you come to a presbytery meeting, people have to stand and be acknowledged, and then they can make their motion. But in a session meeting, we usually don't make somebody do that. So that is allowed. They can stay seated. They can just raise their hand and get called upon. Motions actually do not need to be seconded in a small board. I know that's really different than what you're used to. Some folks will still accept a second just to make people feel more comfortable. There's also no limit to the number of times someone can speak during debate. If you come to a meeting of presbytery, you're limited to speak to 2 times as long as other people are waiting to speak. And so we don't have that in a small group. In a small group, you are open to allow people to speak as many times as they want. And motions which close or limit debate, including the number of times that someone could speak, are allowed to happen. So if your session says, we want to limit the number of times someone speaks to an issue, you can. If they want to say, we're ready to call the question, we're ready to vote, you can do that. But typically in a small session meeting, there will just be lots of conversation, the informal discussion, and then you'll be able to vote. Because at that point, people will have a better idea of what they wanted to vote on in the first place. So rather than having a motion with an amendment and a substitution, you'll actually just be able to talk about it, come up with what the motion should be, write it down for posterity, and everybody then makes their vote. So the chairman does not need to rise while putting questions to a vote. When the proposal is clear to everyone, the vote can be taken without the motion actually having been introduced. However, everything still needs to get written down into the minutes. So it's always good to have the clerk be able to read back what the motion is that people are voting on, just so that they're clear. The moderator can make a motion from the discussion. Typically, the person who's the moderator does not get to make the motion. But in the small board rules, the moderator can say, I hear it sounds like we have an idea of a motion. And they can actually make the motion based on what the discussion has been. Using Robert's rules and having a docket or an agenda for your meeting, which means you get to the end of the list of all the things that happen. What's the last thing that happens? Adjournment, right? If you get to the bottom and you say, is there any other business? And nobody says there's business, then you just have to say, since there's no further business, the meeting is adjourned. A vote to adjourn is not required because you have gone down the list of all of the things that are there, and therefore you're done. In an organization where copies of the minutes are sent to everyone in advance, and the chair says that the minutes have been sent to everyone to review, then the actual reading of them aloud is not required unless someone says, could you please read back the minutes? So a formal motion to approve the minutes is also then not necessary. It could just say from you as the chair, are there any corrections to the minutes? If there are no corrections, then you would say, there being no corrections to the minutes, they stand as approved. If there are corrections, then you could just say, the minutes then stand as corrected. Done. So typically we use unanimous consent to move through routine business. The moderator would say, are there any objections? If there are no objections, then your response is, it is so ordered. If anyone objects, then you could use a more formal vote method. Most common is a voice vote. People say, all in favor, please respond by saying aye or yes, and anyone opposed, say no or nay, and then the results are announced. The ayes have it or the motion fails, and the clerk makes the notes in the minutes. If you can't tell which one wins based on the noise of the vote, you can, as the moderator, say, I'd like to see a show of hands. And you can ask people to raise their hand, which is called the show of hands, to show who's voting yes or who's voting no. Also, any member can say, I would like to see who's voting which way. Their methods and reasons behind it might vary, but they can ask to see who wants to vote each way. It's called the division of the House if you ever want to look it up in Robert's Rules, but just suffice to say that you are counting hands to show which one won but you do not need to list in the minutes how many voted yes and how many voted no. The only time somebody needs to say anything about voting no is if they would like it to be recorded in the minutes that they said no. That means they have the option later to file a complaint, and they needed to show that they voted no. If you need to count your votes, then you can take your time to do that. If people ask for a secret ballot, you may do that as well. You will need to have some blank ballots or some paper handy so that you can use paper. People can write down their vote. Then you will need to have at least 2 people count the ballots. And that way they do it in front of everybody. They don't go off to some secret room, but they can sit down right in front of everybody and show that they're counting the ballots. The last way to vote is called roll call. This is what you see often happening in Congress, where they actually will call out your name and you will say your vote. And then they'll call out the next name and they will say their vote. The voters are tallied then as each person is responding. And often in a roll call vote, all those responses are recorded in the minutes to show who voted for what. Now, it's in most session meetings, you're not going to get that technical. Most of them are going to be more like the conversational, hey, this is what we think we should do. And somebody has to finally put it in the frame of, well, so what is the motion for the minutes? And then everybody says, yep, we all support it. We're good to go. That's pretty standard in most of our session meetings. So when a congregation needs a moderator that you might be called into action, it's because they have a pastor who is not on site for some reason, or they might be between pastors, or it might be a small church that doesn't have anything except pulpit supply coming in and out, and they need someone to run their session meetings at least once a quarter. So the Commission for Congregational Life serves as the place where we can provide a liaison, and that liaison can function as the moderator because you are part of the Presbytery system. So you can moderate both session meetings and congregational meetings as is necessary. The compensation schedule for moderators has been set by the Presbytery. Under no circumstance may a congregation ask a moderator to donate his or her time. This creates financial inequality with congregations, and it means that the next person going in to moderate is going to be walking into a surprise, and that is not fair. If the congregation is one for which you have an affinity and you decide you want to donate your money back, that's fine, but donate it a different day than the day you receive it, because you need to show that they have to pay the moderator fee as a moderator is required. The meetings are compensated at a minimum of $50 per meeting. It doesn't matter whether it's a session meeting, a congregational meeting, a trustees meeting, a deacons meeting, or a task force meeting, it's $50. And then you can ask for your mileage to be reimbursed at the maximum IRS approved rate. You would need to know your mileage from your home to the church and back. Remember, you are the expert. I know you don't feel like the expert, but you see more churches than most session members. And so you often have a lot more to offer that session than they could imagine. So they want to hear from you as an expert, some input, some feedback. Your role is not to run their church. That's the session's role. But your role is to be there as a sounding board and to bring your guidance from your experience. You can bring your creativity if that is your gift. Whatever it is, you also have access to a lot of your colleagues on the Commission for Congregational Life, as well as your own persons on your sessions of your churches that might be able to help provide some wonderful guidance for the churches that you are helping to be liaisons for. So remember, you're not there just to enforce a policy that says they have to have a moderator. You're there to be a part of their family for that temporary time. Your job is to have fun while making sure that you're providing a necessary service.